I hope everyone enjoyed the little bit of an extended break. We're pleased to begin the second panel discussion for today, entitled Understanding the Clinical Trial and Research Landscape in Canada. And with me today, I'm joined by four esteemed panelists. Estelle Bede from Pfizer Canada, Colleen Coxon from Alnylam Pharmaceuticals, Dr. Avi Chakrabarti from Toronto, and Dr. Francois Tourneau from Montreal. So to begin today, I would like for each of you to briefly share your perspective on how the current clinical trial and research landscape for amyloidosis in Canada is evolving and what excites you the most. And anyone can jump in. Who would like to begin?
Is on?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this this panel. I think, Canada is in a very good spot right now because, when Dr. Gilmore yesterday was talking about all the clinical trials that have taken place or are taking place, they are all taking place in Canada. So I think we are really lucky that we do have investigators who want to be part of these clinical trials. We have the manufacturers who want to do them in Canada, and we have the patients who are willing to participate because we do recognize that it is a big burden on the patients to be part of these clinical trials. So I think from a historical standpoint and moving future from the clinical trial standpoint, we're in a good place. And I think when I think about the opportunities, with the formation of the Canadian Amyloidosis Society, the nursing, the Canadian Amyloid Nursing Network, and TAC coming together, I think you guys collectively can really sort of direct where you want research to go in the future.
If I may add to that, so you alluded to all of the, changing that's happening and new clinical trial sites and so on. But there's also research ongoing in Canada that doesn't have to do with drug development, which is actually contributing to build the knowledge base on amyloid and actually contributing also to help us maybe better understand, the barriers, system barriers, care delivery barriers, and how to address all of those. And Canada is, one of the countries that is very active in that front as well. So I think that also is exciting as well.
Yes. Yeah. So, one point I'd like to make is, so with the treatments, so we're talking about what excites us, the development of 4 different treatment methodologies. So the first treatment started in 2019. That's only like 6 years ago. That's when the first treatments were widely available, and that's a short amount of time. So this is really exciting that the first treatment 6 years ago. Now we have 3 other classes. So that is pretty exciting, and it doesn't happen too often in other medical stories. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and in 5 or 6 years ago, in Canada, there were only a few centers which were doing research for amyloidosis, and you didn't even have a center in each province. Just a few provinces who developed an expertise and a cohort. So over the past 5 years, we can see a lot of centers in each province being involved in amyloidosis care, but also research. And that's really a huge opportunity for any company coming with a new treatment to test their drug in our country. And I think we, over the past 5 years, we have been able to prove that Canada was a serious partner for clinical trials, and that we have now a strong network. We have a Canadian Amyloidosis Society that will, I believe, will even increase, the strength of this network.
Thank you. What do you feel are the key challenges you face when initiating research or participating in amyloidosis clinical trials in Canada, especially comparatively with other countries? Go ahead, Francois.
Well, I would say it's probably more a question for my colleagues from the industry, but I would say, if you go to some countries where you have different centers for research. For example, in France, compared to Canada. In Canada, the main issue is sometimes everything which is linked to ethics approval. Each province has their own rules. So when a company comes and try to launch a clinical trial, they have to go through the ethics approval for each province in Canada. And that takes a lot of time, take a lot of resources. And then you have all the legal aspects with the contracts and everything. While if you have, a country which has the same legislation for every center, that helps a lot. So sometimes, we hear that if we put this clinical trial in your province, then we have to do the whole process again. So that could be a challenge for the companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Having central ethics or fewer ethics bodies to have to go through would definitely reduce the barriers. I think the other thing that in Canada is we've only been really treating on the wild type side for CM, since 2019, 2020. In Europe, they've been, they're 5, 6, 7 years ahead of us. So we just don't have the same diagnosis rate. We just don't have the same level of awareness and understanding. And so we're still building on that side of things as well. So we do have great amyloidosis champions here, but the general neurologist and the general cardiologist may not really know much about amyloidosis, and so we need them to be diagnosed in order to get them into the clinical trial. So that can be another barrier that we just need to increase the education collectively across the entire country.
Is the geography in Canada a barrier to clinical trial or research? I know that referring to European countries, they obviously have a far smaller geography to cover, which means that services can be more consistent across different centers, or accessibility to centers that have those services can be easier. Can speak to that potentially, the geography as a barrier?
I think the geography can be perceived as a barrier as well. First of all, coming back to the ethic approval, where you have to go through multiple, institutions and across provinces. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is even accessing patients. Like in Canada, we have, I would think we have a diverse patient population, but sometimes, when we open up clinical trial sites, we can only access big sites in academic institutions and all of that. But it would have been great if we could even have more diversity in our, ability to enroll patients in studies, such as, people that live maybe remote, indigenous population, all of those kind of things, depending on the condition. I think that also is a barrier. Maybe we don't see it often, or we don't really realize it, but then we start realizing it when, we have a drug that is available, and then you start, working maybe in a real-world context. That's where you realize that we've missed maybe a number of people in our studies. Mm-hmm. So that also maybe can be perceived as a barrier.
In terms of the geography, it goes both ways. Like the sites may only be in Calgary, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, and if the patient is in Gander, Newfoundland, they may not want to come to Montreal or Toronto or Calgary 4 times a year, 6 times a year, spend the day. Like it's a big commitment on the patient side as well to have to, engage in the clinical trial, and they're often long. They're 2, 3, 4 years of commitment. So it can be challenging from a geography depending on how far the patients need to travel. Even if the patient knows about it and they're eligible and the physician wants them in there is that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, one of the things is also sometimes, these clinical trials, they require a lot of blood samples, a lot of different small tests, which can be done in the community of the patient, but if the patient is, for example, in Quebec up north, it's hard for the company running the trial to find the local resources to do the blood samples because they have to train them, they have to follow specific strict rules. So sometimes it's easier to get the patient coming to Montreal to fly or to take, a 5 hours drive to come to see us to do just a blood test. So it can be difficult for the patients, especially when they are very sick. So that can be a challenge.
This question is specific for Colleen and Estelle. How is industry currently investing in amyloidosis research, and what factors influence what research is prioritized?
So I think we can break this into kind of two chunks. There's the clinical trials that the manufacturers conduct in the countries for new treatments, and then there's the research that, whether it's a physician group or a patient group proposes to pharmaceutical companies to support. So there's kind of two chunks there. So in terms of the clinical trials, for Alnylam, we have two new trials that are starting up in Canada. They're starting globally, and we have sites in Canada. So we are engaged in terms of the amyloidosis community for those new trials. On the research side, if a physician or an academic site says, "Hey, I want to figure out what is the better red flags to consider," or should we be screening all the patients who are over 50 who have carpal tunnel syndrome, and just like what Dr. Gilmore talked about. Often the pharmaceutical companies have sort of their priorities in terms of where do they want to focus their research that are sort of set at the global level. We always want research in Canada. It's just making sure that there's a good fit between what does the patient community and the physician community want, and then what aligns kind of with our priorities. So a lot of it depends on what is the interest that the various physicians and patient groups have, and proposing that to the manufacturers. We want to partner with you. We want to do research with you. We just need to make sure that it's not a project that's already been done in another country and we're not contributing to new science. We just need Yeah.
It works exactly the same in Pfizer. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can actually comment a little bit more about the research aspect of it. So research funding in Canada is done through these the Tri-Council of CIHR, NSERC, and SHRC. And so these agencies, they fund research. They don't fund development. And so when you're looking at doing research, and we do a lot of development work for diseases like ATTR. And so that puts the researcher at a little bit of an issue. Like, for example, if we wanted to do drug screens, screening drug libraries, that's not funded by the federal councils as much. And so what we end up doing is we form partnerships with biotech companies or drug companies. And so the way this works is if you, in your own lab, if you have your own research program, you have to sort of convince the biotech company that it's worth doing. And so this ends up being a whole bunch of really difficult cold calls where you're talking to the biotech company and trying to impress them with your science to help. So that's another sort of art form which you have to learn in funding your research. Yeah, thanks.
Is there a successful example of that type of collaboration where clinicians, academia, and industry work together to deploy research within Canada for amyloidosis? Is there any examples that you can point to?
Well, I can talk about my lab. So that was. Yeah. Okay. So there. So we're making antibodies to bind up the amyloid and pull it out of the heart, and so that research, it started with experiments done in my lab using test tubes and things like that, and we get a few positive results, and then from there we have to we need patient tissue, so we have to start to talk to cardiologists and pathologists to see if they have tissues on hand to test our hypotheses. And so we gather all of this stuff and we get all of this data until it makes a good enough story, and then we start to contact biotech companies. Just do Google searches, find the biotech companies, find the person there, and then you go try and talk to them, send them a cold email, send them a cold call, and then if you can get them interested, and then you can form this sponsored research agreement, and that's how academia can be funded to do sort of medical development type work. Yeah, and that's what happened to us. We got a biotech company from South San Francisco, and they helped us out a lot, and then it was them who actually took our antibody from the phase 1 through to the phase 2, and then passed it on, and they actually contacted drug companies. So Novo is now taking over from that. So that worked out really well.
Thinking way back to, keep me honest here, 2017. Alnylam partnered with Peter Cullis out in BC to help develop the lipid nanoparticles, and that's how our first drug was developed and being able to treat patients. And we could take the siRNA and put it in a little fat molecule and be able to inject it into patients ultimately. So we did work with out with a lot of people in UBC, Peter Cullis's lab. And that became a very successful. It wasn't specific necessarily to amyloidosis. It was more about drug delivery, but ultimately it benefited amyloidosis patients because we were able to get that treatment, and that's how our first drug, our first generation treatment was able to come. So they do exist in kind of the development side and what Dr. Chakrabarty is discussing. But I think there's definitely more opportunity to be able to pull together the physician group here, the patient group, and work with the manufacturers for us to be able to, and also bring in government funding, because there are a lot of times when whether it's academia or a manufacturer, the provinces will match some of that funding, and you can put together a bigger package, so to speak. So I think definitely in the future we should think about how we can all partner together on that.
Thank you. Is Canada seen as a globally competitive environment for amyloidosis research, and are we able to strengthen that perspective or that position in any way?
To my perspective, I think the answer is yes. Even though Pfizer is no longer doing developmental research in amyloid for now, generally speaking, whenever they have new studies that or if they want to investigate a new drug, Canada is always one of the priority countries that get reached out to see if we have sites and so on. And I think that is because Canada has a reputation of good quality research within the pharmaceutical world, so we always get consulted for sites in Canada.
I would agree, but going back to what Dr. Tourneau was describing, we have a great reputation. Our barrier is that you have to go site by site for ethics review, for contracting, reviewing budgets, and that just takes time. And if it can be done faster in France or in the UK, it's always a competitive situation. Each country wants as many sites as they can get, and so whoever starts up faster gets more sites faster. And so whatever we can do to accelerate that sort of startup process is going to make us even more attractive, because we do have an excellent reputation in terms of being able to conduct any kind of research, and definitely amyloidosis research.
Yeah, I would say, I think we have been able to prove that we are a good team player. Where, when Canadian centers are involved in clinical trials, they do a very good job. They follow the rules. Patients are well selected, well followed. However, the thing is, we like it or not, geopolitics have changed, especially over the past year, and some countries have been more protective with their industry, which include healthcare industry. So at some point, I think, especially now, we were able to establish a good network of people involved in amyloidosis research. Probably time for Canada to take the lead sometimes, and not just to be a good team player. And, to figure out a way that we can develop ideas, so initially funded by federal agencies, but at some point also to go for the development and to develop our own in small biotechs and industries. Dr. Werner was mentioning about another company in Toronto developing a new drug for AL. So there are a lot of very good, strong teams in Canada. So I think we shouldn't be shy, and we should try to push our ideas and attract people, and we want people to work with us and develop these products in Canada.
Excellent, thank you. Colleen, you mentioned about the acceleration of access to trials in Canada. Is there anything that we can do as a community or as a country to help accelerate that? And is there anything that we can do to help, Estelle, to your point, to ensure access to trials in remote regions? So I think the challenge has been identified. What can we do to rectify the challenge?
If we could just have one central ethics for the entire country. I think creating clinical trial networks, I think, would be an optimal kind of setup. And again, the Canadian Amyloid Society is getting itself established, and it will determine what its research priorities are and how can we partner with the patient group and the physician group and the nursing group to align with what your research goals are. And if you know what you want, where you want the research to go, we can help you get there. But yeah, breaking down provincial barriers so that if you do have a patient who's in Newfoundland and they have to get treated in Montreal, what is the impact of data transfer and all of that stuff? Just breaking down those barriers, I think, would make it a lot easier. Getting the word out from to the patients that the clinical trials are ongoing, where the clinical trials are taking place, what the inclusion criteria are, because you may think, oh, I really want to be in clinical trial X, but you have to be a naive patient. You can't have ever been treated with something. So if you've been on treatment for 10 years, you're not going to be eligible. So knowing, just making that easier for patients to understand who's in and who's out, I think that can help physicians so they're not screening patients who wouldn't be eligible in the first place, and it just makes it a more efficient process.
I was going to say, improving patients' health literacy is maybe one way also of helping them actually advocate for themselves to access clinical trials and clinical trial sites and all of that. And for patients in remote regions, I always like to think maybe it's not a thing for us to solve, but sometimes, more infrastructures would help. Also, even if they can have, you spoke about the research network, you could even have, centers in those remote regions that are closer to patients, maybe that also can help.
Ms. Warabi, anything to add?
This might be a little off topic, but so when like the amyloidosis society or smaller society like this, when it decides how to spend its money for research goals or clinical trial goals, etc., I just want to mention that trainees are cheap So when you fund a trainee, they don't cost that much money, whether they're a resident or a student or whatnot. But what you're doing is you're bringing in a good competitive person into the field. And so when you fund trainees, you get a good extra bump. Yeah. So.
Francois, did you have anything to add?
Yeah. I think, one of the things we try to do with the Canadian Amyloid Society is first to have a map of the different centers who be able to provide care for patients with amyloidosis across Canada, and there will be it will be access to the public, so patients will be able to see if they are not, treated or they are looking for a center who can take care of them. They will be able to access this map, and most of the center on this map will be also involved in clinical trials. So it will be a way for patients who want to be involved in new treatments, to have access to a center, maybe, hopefully in their province, or at least not far from where they live, where they can get access to some potentially new drugs. And then, across Canada also, through the society, between ourselves, we will be able to figure out who is involved in which clinical trials, who's not involved in that trial, but could provide patients to a center. Just even in Montreal, we are at least 2, maybe sometimes 3 big centers doing some research for amyloidosis. I'm not even always sure what the center at the other side of the city is doing in terms of clinical trials. So, I have patients who don't qualify for my clinical trials, but they might qualify for their clinical trial. So if we can improve communication between ourselves already, that will be a big step.
So I think we've established the important role that organizations like TAC play in terms of patient identification for trials or clinical trial awareness, health literacy. Is there anything else that patient organizations can do to help strengthen the ecosystem and infrastructure of research in Canada?
So in a previous life, in a equal kind of rare specialty disease, the patient group funded their own research. So they decided, this is our priority, this is what research we want done, and they would get funding from the government, they would get funding from manufacturers, and then they could determine what their priorities were based on the membership and what they wanted to accomplish, and whether it was through funding fellows to work on particular groups, or they wanted to do a particular analysis of a registry. You can determine what your own priorities are, and you can fund them. You kind of self-fund them, and that again contributes to the overall body of knowledge in what does amyloidosis look like in Canada, because it's probably different than it looks like in the UK versus France or versus the US. So I think the more we understand about the Canadian amyloidosis landscape, the better it's going to be for all of us in terms of breaking down barriers, increasing health literacy. Should we be screening all the patients who have carpal tunnel syndrome? Whatever it is, better access to echo. But I think that the patient advocacy groups can really step up and own that if that's an area that they want to go forward with, and you have partners here who can help you with that, and obviously all the physicians who are used to writing grant requests and all that sort of stuff know that way better than the industry does. But there are definitely ways that the patient groups can prioritize what research they want to get done as well.
And I was going to say, I think education is never enough. I think patients needs to be educated more and more, and I think the more they are educated, the more they can get involved. I think Dr. Tounou, you mentioned about the registry, and I think that registry also have a patient interface, so patients can enter the data also in that registry. That is also a way of kind of pulling together information and being able to generate publications from Canadian patients. So that's also another way. And I think there can be maybe small steps to be done, but I feel like getting people educated more and more is always the first step to get things done, because the more organized people are, the more they can make their voice heard.
Go ahead. Oh, we're going to save questions to the end.
No, just what I wanted to add is that sometimes, industry partners, they offer grants to, build some research project, but we're still, we're free to decide about the subject, the topic, and we can, propose to them, which kind of research we would like to do. And it's always very, an add-on when we have patient partners, because they bring inside the project their view, what are their needs, and if the research that we propose really makes sense for them too. And if it makes sense for the patients, if it makes sense for the clinicians, then the research has a high chance to be successful. And for our partners and from the industry, they rather fund this kind of research when they know that it will make a change for the patients and for the healthcare providers. So in that point, if as a patient you want to be involved in research and try to help science progress, you can talk with people in your center. Are you looking for patient partners? Are you interested in having me thinking about the protocol, having my point of view? In my center in Montreal, we are currently looking for patients to be partners in one of the projects, because as Dr. Fine mentioned yesterday, it takes a village to take care of patients with amyloidosis. So we have, besides research in drugs, research in physical exercise, nutrition, etc. So, and patients are very important for all these topics. So I invite you to be involved in this kind of research.
Thank you. How can we utilize real-world evidence and patient-reported outcomes as a research conduit for understanding amyloidosis in Canada?
I guess real-world evidence tells you what's happening, like in real life. So you get to see the real picture of, once your medication has been approved and then it's being used largely, so you get to see the actual real picture of how it behaves, right? So I think it's always important to have those kind of evidence. And, I feel like everything that we've just mentioned will culminate into those kind of initiatives, because that's what will inform you on additional things that you may do, whether it's from a disease, even from a disease, like identifying patients earlier, those kind of things. All of that comes into real-world evidence, like even addressing system barriers and all of that. It's usually the real-world evidence that will allow you to do that. So,
join the registry. I think that's the biggest thing. If you want to use real-world evidence, we need the evidence. So we need the patients to agree to be part of the registry, and then you can interrogate the data in the registry to identify what the barriers are, or when people get diagnosed, or you can learn so much. But we need a critical mass of data, and the only way we can get that data is if you capture it in the registry, if you want the real world data. So that's how we can do it. And if we really want to advance it within the research within Canada, I think that will become just, a gold mine of data that you can then mine for years to come.
Yeah, I think this is the key. Don't forget that, with all the ethics regulations, physicians cannot enter patients in the registry if their center has not been properly opened. It takes time. In our province, we don't have all our centers which are allowed to enter patients in the registry. So there are a lot of amyloidosis patients that in our province cannot be entered in the registry by the physicians because their center is not yet legally authorized to enter this data. But the patient can do it by themselves. They have their own. This is their medical file. They can do this. This is their clinical information. They can do whatever they want. They can share it with the registry, and that will really accelerate their enrollment. So it's really important to do this first step. And don't worry if your doctor finally enter you in the registry and you enter yourself. I think Noel, correct me, but you are able to figure out that and then mix the data together.
Looking forward prospectively at the amyloidosis clinical trial and research ecosystem in Canada, where do you see the research and trial landscape in the next 3 to 5 years, and how would you like to get there? Everyone's smiling, but no one's stepping up to answer.
So the question is, what would be my dream, or what would be what I've,
Let's say both. Aspirationally, what would you like to see, and what do you think is realistic?
What I would like to see is, and that part I think we'll be able to achieve it, is to have a very well and strong organized research network across the country, where all the centers being actively engaged in research in amyloidosis are all connected together, are able to exchange information, are able to share the clinical trials, because each center cannot do all the clinical trials which are available. Make sure that also, when industry partner come with a new trial, we are able to tell them, listen, this center currently, they probably have the patients you are looking for. You should try to contact them and figure out if they can be involved in your clinical trial. Instead of letting sometimes the companies sending emails randomly and trying to figure out if someone would be interested in being involved. I think that will be a huge improvement and big strength of our network, which will somehow mitigate all the issues with the ethics and budget, because the time we lose there, we can try to save it back from that point. Also, ideally, I would like to see more Canadians leading these clinical trials. But I think, we need to prove ourselves that we're able to do it. I think we make a huge step already over the past 5 years, but I think we should try more and more to be able to lead these clinical trials and, develop other partnerships. We had a lot of partnerships with the US. Probably we should be open more to Asia, Europe, and try to develop this network with other countries. For sure, the fact that geopolitics change could be a barrier, but I would see that as an opportunity for Canada. It's time. There's an opportunity for us to improve our links, increase our links with other countries. I was talking with my friend and colleague Thibaut Damy last month about our network and the fact that the registry is more than 800 patients. And he was surprised and he said, "Oh, maybe it's time that we, share our data from France and Canada because we have, they have a very large registry for years, but 800 patients, that means something. So they were very interested in now trying to figure out how we can work together.
Anyone else have any additional thoughts? Aspirationally, where would you like to be in 3 to 5 years? Avi, from the research, from the academia research perspective.
So one point I could make is if you are in a situation where you're like either an academic at a university or a hospital research institute, and your research has some sort of commercial application to it, when you're actually interacting with the companies. One thing I found that was helpful is not to have all of your intellectual property finalized. So to actually, when you're crafting that relationship, if you can actually talk to the company and if you go after co-intellectual property, co-IP, that helps form relationships better between industry and academia.
I think maybe one thing would be nice, and patients group like the foundations can really help that. Is that there is clearly a gap between academic research and products on the market in Canada. And it's not just for amyloidosis research, it's for any kind of drug development or devices development. We have a lot of very nice technologies coming out of our research centers across Canada. But then when a researcher wants to develop it, they are on their own. They have to figure out how to do it. The government of each province, they have a few programs, but I don't know for the other province, but the one of Quebec, it's not very strong, And I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to the business school, so you try to figure it out by yourself. But if we were able to make the government understand that at some point they have to develop some kind of strong agency, but a very agile one, not like just bureaucracy, but someone who, like a startup incubator, someone who's going to really help the academic researcher to bring their product of their research to a product that will really end up in clinical care. That will be very, very helpful. But currently, there's a big gap. The US are much stronger for that. They're able to, rapidly move from academic research to biotech. That Canadians are not able to do that, and I think it's a shame because we shouldn't be shy about our research. We have a lot of talents doing academic research that need help for this.
Yeah, perhaps a forum, like something done within an industry, academia, or industry research forum, just some place where these two people can get together and talk without too much structure in terms of just about clinical trials or just industry, academia research forum within the ATTR disease group.
I just went recently in Montreal to a big AI conference, and it was exactly that. You have academics, you had big companies, the OpenAI and all these companies, and all these people were together. And then you could see that, everyone was doing business development and research, and it was going very fast. So for healthcare, it's harder because you have to respect some rules, but we are not even there. We are like far from that. But that would be, the kind of forum that we could try to develop.
Colleen and Estelle, any final thoughts on the question?
3 to 5 years, it may be a bit short, but I think that there is a lot that we can, what can we learn from AI? How can that help with the diagnostic process? I think, to me, the clinical trials are the clinical trials, but how do we make it easier for patients to be diagnosed so patients don't have this, odyssey, as we've heard that term many times, in terms of just getting diagnosed. Just because you're 80 and you're slowing down, it doesn't mean that you just have to accept it. But the more education we have around that, and I'm hoping AI, whether it's reading echoes or putting in place sort of order sets for patients to have to go through, and how do we make that as quick and nimble as possible so it's not as burdensome for the patient and not as burdensome for the healthcare system, because we know that there's kind of a finite budget there. And so I think there's probably stuff with AI. We are sort of the grandfathers of AI. We just need to learn how to deploy it. And the panel yesterday was excited about that. But there are the issues with every single province having their own data set, and I think there's 40 different EMRs across the country that we'd have to clean up. But I think there is some way there that we can learn a lot in a short period of time, and we can kind of catch up and become even leaders from that standpoint.
It's funny because the first time when I read this question, I was like, oh, it would be nice if we could have a central, unified ethic approval system across the country. That would help a lot. With phase 3 studies, I don't know if that's going to happen in 3 to 5 years, maybe not even in 10 years. But I think, speaking about early diagnosis of patients, I think there's, AI is one way, to identify patients earlier. But then there's a big question of, the whole reimbursement landscape as well. When you get patients early, how early do you get them? And then that also raises questions, right? Would those patients have access to treatment or not? And what happens to them? And, so I maybe have more question marks in my head for the next 3 to 5 years than responses or aspirations. But I think as we will be evolving, I'm sure, some of those questions will likely be answered, maybe not as soon as we think, but, I'm hopeful that the future is going to be better.
Excellent. We can open it up for questions. Okay.
I'm just wondering if you've, this is for Colleen, but also for Estelle, if you've collected real-world data on vutrisiran in the wild type, since it's been approved for almost a year in the U.S., and how that differs from the clinical studies, and also whether there's any data on vutrisiran plus Vyndamax in the wild-type ATTR patients.
So in terms of, I'm not aware of specific projects that are collecting real-world evidence in the U.S. right now. That being said, there is always, the pharmacovigilance that is always taking place. I think we're still a little bit early because it's only been around since basically April 1st, and it's November 1st, so there wouldn't even probably be enough data yet for them to query and figure out if there are new signs, new safety signals, et cetera. So I think we're just too early there. We still probably need at least a year of data to be able to go and do that. But I know that they will work with various insurance companies that, in the U.S. they just have a completely different access to data that we don't have in Canada. And then the second question in terms of combination therapy, so there are patients who are on combination therapy in the U.S. It is I would say a very small percentage of patients because the insurers are just not prepared to pay for the combination. And so it's very few and far between. I would say less than 10% of patients are on combination therapy. Most of them are on just monotherapy. Yeah.
And just if I may ask, let's try and keep questions treatment agnostic, just to abide by rules and regulations. We can keep it generalized, but nothing specific.
It seems to me, I've challenged people about the diagnosis and treatment of prevention for heart disease. And when they say, well, we're doing our best, I say, well, 50% of the patients are still getting cardiovascular disease, and you're not doing a very good job with the prevention. In this case, I'm talking about diagnosis of amyloidosis, and we are making the diagnosis when the patients are mostly half dead, to excuse the expression, and we need to make an earlier diagnosis. And the only way to make an earlier diagnosis is to invest a lot in trying to make criteria for diagnosis better, but then obviously to make sure that the patients who get that diagnosis are inclusive of the majority of the patients who have that diagnosis but have yet been diagnosed because they don't have adequate access to care. That would seem to me what needs to be the major priority. We now have some treatments which are effective at making a change in the course of diagnosis, but we don't yet diagnose the patients until they're already late in the disease process when 20% mortality is a good result. Any comments from the panel?
So is your comment about how can we make sure that patient gets early diagnosis? Is that?
My comment is that we are not making an early diagnosis, and how can we get to an early diagnosis? And AI obviously should be part of that, but it means a more intensive process of searching for appropriate ways to make the diagnosis. And the current diagnostic criteria leave the patients till they're very late in the course of the disease.
I think so. I don't know. I hope I got your question well. I think what we've done so far to try to ensure early diagnosis. I mean, I think you have to think of this as a journey, because when it started, I mean, years ago, first of all, the level of knowledge and awareness of the disease itself was very low. I mean, anecdotally, before joining Pfizer, I had never heard about amyloidosis, never knew, what that is. And I think today, maybe awareness is not up there yet, but there's been some improvement in awareness. So there's been a lot that has been done, education, we're talking about research, even talking about it like at conferences, news, those kind of events have raised awareness. Are we fully there yet? Maybe not. I mean, there's likely a lot to be done. The more people are aware, the more, they're aware of how to identify the disease early. I think the more likely you are to catch those patients early. And I think we have physicians here in the room, experts here. They can all, when we speak with them, I mean, they all tell us that we're seeing those patients earlier and earlier. Are we quite there yet? Maybe not. But I feel like progress has been made, but it's not the end of it. I think, and talking about AI and all of these tools, the intent of all of these new initiatives is to get those patients earlier. So I don't know if that, addresses your question. Maybe Colleen, you can add.
Yeah,
to that.
I would say, if we look at, there's kind of, you need physicians to be educated to recognize the red flags, to recognize that the patient has heart failure. Why do they have heart failure? And go that extra step in terms of what is the next step in the diagnostic, ordering the correct echo, and going through that pathway. we have a group here, and I would say the heart failure physicians in Canada are very engaged around amyloidosis and want to learn about it. And if you go to the Canadian, the heart failure conferences in Canada, there is a ton of conversation around amyloidosis, a lot of education, people attend it. If you go to the Canadian Cardiovascular Congress, which is a more general cardiology, there's nothing. If you go to a general neurology conference, there's nothing. So the manufacturers can push education as much as we can, but there is, right now, it's kind of kept within the heart failure world in terms of who the experts and who are recognizing this. We have to get it to the next level of, I'm going to call the general cardiologists who are recognizing this. And that takes energy from the cardiologists who want to learn, and for, in general, we just need to educate across the country in more, I would say. So it's very sad, and I agree with you 100% that we don't get patients early enough. I would say there's probably 15,000 patients who are undiagnosed right now that we need to find those patients. We want to find them. We want to help the patients get diagnosed, and but we need AI. We need awareness, and it really comes down to physicians recognizing what the signs are.
So as a naive layperson who's been diagnosed with amyloidosis, I'm listening to the panel and I'm thinking the term health literacy, is that code for self-advocacy? And so I should be hanging out at the clinicaltrials.gov website thinking, is there a trial that's for me? Is there a trial that's for me? Or should I rely on my hematologist to, because this is the concept of most patients, is that my hematologist will have my best interests at heart. He or she will, or they will know that there are clinical trials and they will alert me to it. So is that, do you think the current landscape allows for that? Because I'm hearing a lot of that doctors don't communicate or they're not aware of trials. So as a patient, listening to your presentation, how should I proceed?
I think it works both ways. I have patients who come to our clinic and say, oh, I read this article, or I saw this news, and I heard about the CRISPR technology. Do you know any center where it's done? And sometimes even if the physician or the nurse have a lot of interest in amyloidosis, they are not aware about all the clinical trials going on. So, whatever information you figure out by yourself, you should bring it to your physician or the team that is taking care of you, because they may say, oh yeah, I didn't know about that. That could be very very important, and I know the doctor taking care of this clinical trial. Let me see if he can see you, and then you can benefit from this trial. As you said, your physician really, the goal is to provide you the best care they have in mind. Unfortunately, because our system is still young, they don't get access to all the information which is available in terms of research and clinical trials. The new Canadian Amyloidosis Society is building a newsletter where we'll, provide a lot of important information on a regular basis. So people are going to be more and more informed. But, whatever any patients group is able to get as information and share with the healthcare provider is still an additional value.
Good morning. My name is Keith Dares. I'm with the Canadian Amyloidosis Support Network, and I want to just congratulate the panel and thank them very much for their insights into these very important conversations. But I do want to pick up on what Ms. Coxon has arisen, and that is the registry for amyloidosis patients. And thank you for bringing that up, because it's very, very important, not only for industry, the medical community, but for the patient groups and the patients themselves. And it's very simple, and I encourage all amyloidosis patients to consider registering at the registry. It's very simple, amyloidosisregistry.ca, or pardon me, amyloidregistry.ca, and that'll take you into a page that will get you to sign up, and the benefits of this in the long term will benefit every patient that's out there. Thank you.
We can't hear. Okay, speak into the mic.
Can you help me out? I'm suggesting I will volunteer, because what I heard was I think this panel and all the experts require patience as much as we require the expertise. So will anyone support me, and I will volunteer for a drug?
Okay. Yeah, we can definitely talk.
Thank you kindly. Thank you.
Perfect. I think we have time for one more question. Our panelists will be available over lunch as well to answer any questions.
Hi. Thanks very much for the interesting comments and for the feedback and given everyone, obviously, the understanding of what actually happens out there in terms of clinical trials and in terms of access to medication. I understand from several patients that they get very frustrated. For example, they get told, I've got wild-type amyloidosis, it's been diagnosed, but I don't qualify for treatment because of X, Y, or Z. And they're told to come back to their cardiologist or whoever in a year's time for a follow-up. Is that an appropriate timeline to come back for a follow-up, or should that be shortened? And sometimes those criteria that, in terms of the inclusions and the exclusions, sometimes they're not quite, what's the right word? It's almost as though you have to be even more sick than you already are before you get that. Is there any way that we can get around any of those barriers that patients are experiencing at the moment?
So, I think I'm not completely sure I understood your question, but the thing is that what we see, and that what Estelle mentioned earlier, is that the patients we see in 2025 are not the same as the one I used to see in 2020. The patients I saw in 2020, our mortality rate was enormous. Patients were very sick. There was the first one which were easy to diagnose because they had all the signs. And even if we were initiating some treatments, then, their prognosis was not significantly changed. Now, because awareness has improved, and we get, a patient diagnosed at the first episode of heart failure, for example, or at the first episode of arrhythmia, then they show up in our clinic much less sick than they used to be. The thing is, now, when people build some clinical trials, they didn't build that in 1 month. It took months or years to think about it. And it was based on the population that was in the clinic at that time. So it's true that sometimes we enroll in clinical trials, we do all the paperwork, legal stuff, and then when it's time to start enrolling patients, our patients who were eligible 6 months ago when we started the process, they are already getting better, and they are not eligible for the new drug anymore. So, and that's the issue with research in healthcare. It takes time. It's not like research in AI or everything goes very fast. So that's really an issue. I think we need to figure out a way to accelerate some process that sometimes are unnecessary slow, like, the legal paperwork, budget, discussion, and whatever. So we can, we have the patients, they are ready, they are eligible. It's time to, put them in this clinical trial so they can benefit from the drugs. And we don't have this frustration that, you are not sick enough to be part of this clinical trial, or you're not sick enough to have access to this drug which is approved by the government. And I hear that all the time. Patients say, you are telling me that the health ministry doesn't want to cover the drug and wants me to be sicker before starting treating me. How can it be acceptable? And it's hard to explain that to them.
Perfect.
I feel there should be some kind of mechanism, because when we do the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, to your point, it's been maybe those rules have been set 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they're all at that time. Yep. It's changed, as you say. So there should be some kind of mechanism, not to get it out to every person that comes in, but to minimize some of those and change some of that criteria.
Yeah, so there are updates in protocol during clinical trials that sometimes, the drug companies decide that because enrollment is not as expected and the population has probably changed, they decide to change some inclusion or exclusion criteria. That happens all the time. Figured that some processes are not necessary anymore, so they remove that from the protocol. So that part exists, but still taking time. And sometimes patients were eligible because there was no drug on the market approved by the government. When the trial opened, there's a drug which is approved. So when you tell the patient, listen, you have the choice between the drug which is approved versus being enrolled in a clinical trial with a research drug, and you can have a placebo. And of course, we know what the patients will do, and I'll do the same if I was a patient. So,
I am cognizant there's more questions. We are over time, so I want to be respectful of our panelists' time. I'm sure that they'll be gracious to provide any answers informally during the lunch break, but we do need to break, and we'll reconvene back here at 1:30. Thank you.
Thank you.